The world today. Industrialized nations after the Cold War. The beginning of a new global economy began with the end of the Cold War. The division between communist Eastern and democratic Western Europe crumbled. Business and travel became easier. At the same time, new challenges emerged, including a rise in unemployment and an immigration from the developing world. One exciting change was the reunification of Germany. However, East Germany's economy was weak and had to be modernized. Europe. In the 1990s, the European Economic Community became the European Union, or EU. The euro soon became the common currency for most of Western Europe. By the early 2000s, more than a dozen countries had joined the EU, including some Eastern European nations. The expanded EU allowed Europe to compete economically with the United States and Japan. However, older members of the EU worried that the weak economies of Eastern European nations might harm the EU. Most Eastern European nations wanted to join NATO too. Russia. After the breakup of the Soviet Union, Russia struggled to forge a market economy. Unemployment and prices soared, and criminals flourished. In 1998, Russia defaulted on much of its foreign debt. High inflation and the collapse of the Russian currency forced banks and businesses to close. When Vladimir Putin became president in 2000, he promised to end corruption and strengthen Russia's economy. However, he also increased government power at the expense of civil liberties. The United States. After the Cold War, the United States became the world's only superpower. It waged wars in the Middle East and started peacekeeping operations in Haiti and the former Yugoslavia. An economic boom in the 1990s produced a budget surplus in the United States. Within a decade, however, slow economic growth and soaring military expenses led to huge budget deficits. The Pacific. The Pacific Rim nations have become a rising force in the global economy. Following World War II, Japan became an economic powerhouse and dominated this region. However, by the 1990s, Japan's economy began to suffer, and Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea surged ahead. These Asian tigers have achieved economic success due in part to low wages, long hours, and other worker sacrifices. Globalization. Globalization defines the post-Cold War world. It is the process by which national economies, politics, and cultures become integrated with those of other nations. One effect of globalization is economic interdependence. This means that countries depend on one another for goods, resources, knowledge, and labor. Multinational corporations. Improvements in transportation and communication, the spread of democracy, and the rise of free trade have made the world more interdependent. Developed nations control much of the world's capital, trade, and technology. Yet they rely on workers in developing countries to which they outsource jobs to save money or increase efficiency. Globalization has also encouraged the rise of multinational corporations that have branches and assets in many countries. Interdependence. One effect of interdependence is that an economic crisis in one region can have a worldwide impact. For example, any change in the global oil supply affects economies all around the world. Another example is debt. Poor nations need to borrow capital from rich nations in order to modernize. When poor nations cannot repay their debts, both poor nations and rich nations are hurt. Regional trade blocs. Many international organizations and treaties make global trade possible. The United Nations deals with a broad range of issues. The World Bank gives loans and advice to developing nations. The International Monetary Fund promotes global economic growth. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, tries to ensure that trade flows smoothly and freely. It opposes protectionism, the use of tariffs to protect a country's industries from competition. Regional trade blocs such as the EU in Europe, NAFTA in North America, APEC in Asia, promote trade within regions. And here's a look at the major trade alliances around the world. And of course, you can see that they are regionalized, starting over here with NAFTA in North America. Then you have a trade bloc in Central America and another one in South America. You have the EU in Europe. You have the SCO in Northern Asia. In Southeast Asia, you have the ASEAN. You have the PIF, the SAARC, the AL, and the AU. And here's a look at the WTO members, which you can see encompasses most of the nations in the world, although a lot of your North African and a lot of your North Asian countries are not included. Concerns. Global trade has many benefits. It brings consumers a greater variety of goods and services. It generally keeps prices lower. It also exposes people to new ideas and technology. Nations involved in free trade often become more democratic. However, some people oppose globalization of trade. They claim that rich countries exploit poor countries. Some believe that globalization hurts indigenous peoples by taking away their lands and disrupting their cultures. Others say that the emphasis on profits encourages too rapid development. This endangers sustainability, thereby threatening future generations. Security in a dangerous world. Weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, include nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. During the Cold War, the United States and Russia built up arsenals of nuclear weapons. To ensure that nuclear weapons did not proliferate or spread rapidly, many nations signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, in 1968. However, the treaty does not guarantee that nuclear weapons will not be used. 4 nations have not signed the treaty, and other nations, such as Iran and North Korea, are suspected of buying and selling nuclear weapons, even though they are treaty members. Stockpiles of nuclear weapons in the former Soviet Union are a special concern. This is because the Russian government has not had the money to secure the weapons properly. Nuclear proliferation. The world continues to be concerned about nuclear proliferation or the spread of nuclear weapons. Both Iran and North Korea are believed to be developing nuclear weapons. In fact, now it is widely believed that North Korea already has nuclear capability. It's believed they do not yet have medium-range and long-range weapons with the delivery capacity to deliver a nuclear warhead. However, we believe they're working on that. And it is also believed that Iran is working on developing nuclear weapons. War in Iraq and Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda's attacks triggered a global reaction. Fighting terrorism became a central goal of both national and international policies. In 2001, Osama bin Laden and other Al-Qaeda leaders were living in Afghanistan. When Afghanistan's Islamic fundamentalist leaders, the Taliban, refused to surrender the terrorists, the United States attacked Afghanistan and overthrew them. Because President Bush believed that Saddam Hussein of Iraq was secretly producing WMDs, the United States also declared war on Iraq. In addition, increased security at home became a priority. As a result, the United States created a new Department of Homeland Security and instituted more rigorous security measures at airports and public buildings. Challenges and hopes for the future. The environment. In 1962, Rachel Carson released her book Silent Spring, in which she described the problems and environmental damage caused by pesticides. She helped to start the environmental movement and started a new field of science, ecology, the study of living things and their environment. Deforestation. Deforestation has become a concern as the rainforests are disappearing at an alarming rate. The rainforest is home to diverse groups of living organisms. Tropical rainforests cover only 6% of the Earth's surface, but they support 50% of the world's plant and animal species. Plants and trees remove carbon dioxide from the air and produce oxygen. Chlorofluorocarbons. Chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, are believed by many scientists to be depleting the ozone layer, a thin layer of gas in the upper atmosphere that shields the Earth from the sun's ultraviolet rays. Other scientists believe that the greenhouse effect is contributing to global warming, a gradual rise in the average temperatures of the Earth. It could lead to rising sea levels and could dramatically change coastal areas. Acid rain. Sulfur and other chemicals released into the atmosphere from cars and factories mixes with moisture in the air. It returns in the form of precipitation and is known as acid rain. It is killing forests in North America and in Europe. Ecological disasters. In 1984, toxic chemicals were released in a gas leak at a pesticide facility in Bhopal, India. And it exposed 500,000 people to the toxins. The exact number of deaths caused is unclear, but it numbers into the thousands. A meltdown at a nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, Ukraine in 1986 caused only about 50 people were killed directly by exposure to radioactive fallout, but it's estimated that thousands could suffer from an increased risk of cancer. Approximately 600,000 people were exposed to the fallout. The oil tanker, the Exxon Valdez, was involved in a major oil spill in Alaska in 1989. Since then, we have had some other ecological disasters, including a massive earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan and caused a partial meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Today, we know that that power plant is still leaking radiation, which is seeping into the sea. An oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, dumping millions of barrels of oil all along the Gulf Coast and doing catastrophic damage to the environment all along the Gulf Coast of the United States. And that just happened a couple years ago. So we continue to see many of these disasters. International efforts. In 1987, a major environmental conference was held in Montreal, Canada. In 1997, 150 countries signed the Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse emissions. The United States signed, but has not ratified the Kyoto Protocol for fear that efforts to meet the agreement would hurt the economy of the United States. Sustainable development. There has been a push to move towards sustainable development. Economic development that does not interfere with future generations being able to meet their basic needs. Green Revolution. The Green Revolution refers to the development of new strains of grains that have high yields. These new strains have been used to increase agricultural production in many developing countries. Developing countries are characterized by a farming economy and little modern technology. Technological revolution. Rapid developments in technology are changing the entertainment that we enjoy, the way we communicate, and the way we do business. Some of the technological developments include the internet, satellites, and cell phones. Space and exploration. In 1969, the United States landed astronauts on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Space exploration has continued with the development of the Space Shuttle, a reusable spacecraft, and the development of space stations, including the International Space Station. Biotechnology. Biotechnology continues to develop as we can now produce genetically modified foods and new medicines. Other technological advances include gene therapy, cloning, and stem cell research. Some scientists have been concerned that genetic engineering might create new strains of deadly bacteria. Biowarfare and bioterrorism. Two new threats in the world are biowarfare and bioterrorism. Both use biological and chemical weapons.